and welcome. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Here's what's coming up on the show tonight.
I'm not going to make any comment now.
Can you explain to the public why you think you should remain as Prime Minister, given you jumped to key tax cuts that led you to be elected and got rid of your Chancellor?
You were the one that wanted to cut the 45p rate. You and the Chancellor designed this budget together. He has to go because of the fallout from it. How come you get to stay?
Former Tory Chancellor Philip Hammond has just said that you have totally trashed the Tory parties. Will you apologise to your party?
Given everything that has happened, what credibility do you have to continue governing?
A lot has happened in the last few hours in the United Kingdom. Even as Britain struggled with the crippling cost of living crisis, the UK Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, has been sacked and has been replaced with former Health and Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt. Prime Minister Liz Truss has been quite busy herself. She held a press conference announcing another U-turn in her government's tax cut plan. So tonight on Gravitas, we put the spotlight on the embattled UK Prime Minister. We'll also speak to an expert about her leadership, her credibility. We'll ask the all-important question, should Liz Truss remain Prime Minister? Stay with us on the show tonight.
Not just this one, sir.
Prime Minister, Your Majesty.
Your Majesty, lovely to see you again.
Back again.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Oh dear. Anyway, no, I never know how much they want to take.
They say there is never a dull moment in politics. King Charles seems to be realizing just that pretty quickly. Back again, dear, oh dear. Those words perfectly sum up what's happening in British politics right now. Liz Truss simply cannot catch a break. After weeks of drama, Truss has sacked her Chancellor. Kwasi Kwarteng is out. Just 6 weeks after he took the job, the reason, of course, is the mini-budget that he presented, the one that brought not just the Conservative government, but the entire British economy to its heels.
I met the former Chancellor earlier today. I was incredibly sorry to lose him. He is a great friend, and he shares my vision to set this country on the path to growth. Today, I have asked Jeremy Hunt to become the new Chancellor. He's one of the most experienced and widely respected government ministers and parliamentarians.
And with that, Truss completed a complete U-turn. She had already restored the 45% tax for the super-rich, the highest rate of income tax in the United Kingdom. In her address today, she practically reversed her controversial mini-budget. Listen in now.
We need to act now to reassure the markets of our fiscal discipline. I have therefore decided to keep the increase in corporation tax that was planned by the previous government.
Like I said, within a matter of a few weeks, the Truss government has gone from a partial to a full U-turn. The reasons are obvious. The Truss government was under immense pressure to roll back that controversial budget. In fact, the British Prime Minister admitted this herself. The markets weren't ready for her proposals.
It is clear that parts of our mini-budget went further and faster than markets were expecting.
Now, that was a rather mild assessment. The impact of that mini-budget was catastrophic, to say the least. Let me explain. The Truss budget crashed the pound. Investors dumped British government bonds. Pensions almost went bust. And I'm not saying this, the Bank of England did. The UK Central Bank had to make an emergency intervention. It bought government bonds to save the people's pensions. Meanwhile, the IMF openly criticized the tax cuts. When did you last hear a major economy being criticized by the IMF? It was a damning verdict for the world's sixth largest economy. In the end, Truss has ended the nightmare by sacking the Chancellor that she appointed herself just 38 days ago. How did that happen? Some reports have come out. Kwarteng was in Washington yesterday. He was there for an IMF meeting. But he cut short his visit by a day. So what happened? Apparently, Truss was facing a revolt back home. Members of the Conservative Party were putting pressure on her to reverse the proposals of the mini-budget. Well, Truss seems to have relented. But again, this U-turn has permanently dented her reputation, her credibility. The question now is, can she survive this? Let's take that question to our guest on the show tonight. To understand what's next for Truss, joining me now is former senior journalist Andrew Whitehead from London. Andrew, welcome to the broadcast.
It's a pleasure.
Now, I'll start with the same question that journalists across the UK in that press conference asked Liz Truss. Should she step down?
Well, she has lost her Chancellor of the Exchequer and a very close personal and political ally after little more than a month in office. She has seen two of the main elements of her mini-budget, her economic policy, reversed in deeply humiliating circumstances. She doesn't have the confidence of the markets. It's difficult to say that she has the confidence of her own party. So I think her position now is deeply vulnerable. She has been humiliated by a series of U-turns and by being forced to sack Kwasi Kwarteng as her Chancellor. And people are speculating whether she will survive the weekend. I think we can't be sure. She's quite a tough cookie. She won't give in without a fight, but it does feel as if the sands of time are draining away from her.
Andrew, it's interesting that you say that. On one hand, that she's a tough cookie, but also there's speculation, will she survive this weekend? Now, until a few weeks back, Truss was determined. She did several interviews to defend her economic policies. Before I ask my next question, let's listen into what she had said.
You're prepared to be unpopular, aren't you?
Yes, I am. What is important to me is that we grow the British economy, because that is what will ultimately deliver higher wages, more investment in towns and cities across the country. That is what will ultimately deliver more money into people's pockets.
How many people voted for your plan?
What do you mean by that? Well, people in 2019 who voted Conservative voted for a successful country where we are levelling up all parts of the country and where we're driving growth, enterprise and opportunity.
Right, Andrew Whitehead is still with us. Andrew, I'm sure you must have heard those statements from Truss too. What was the final straw, in your opinion, that led to today's humiliating U-turn?
I think the markets made clear that they didn't buy in to what the government was doing, that they weren't going to invest in a country where the sums didn't add up. She had announced, or her Chancellor announced last month, the biggest series of tax cuts that Britain had seen for half a century, but didn't make clear where the money would come from. And the impact has been the pound crashing, but also a sharp increase in interest rates. And that's what's really affecting the ordinary person here. If you've got a mortgage, if you've got a home loan, the interest rate in prospect for it is going to be sharply increased. People are panic-stricken by that. There's already a cost of living crisis, and Conservative members of Parliament are fearful that they're going to lose their seats in the next general election in a couple of years' time. So it was the market sentiment and it was the political panic within her own party which forced her to do something to try to regain the confidence of both party and markets by sacking her Chancellor and doing a really humiliating U-turn on her economic policy.
Right, Andrew, at this point, let's talk about some of the global reactions coming in, some strong statements. In fact, Scotland's First Minister says she has called for a general election and has labelled Liz Truss a lame duck Prime Minister. Your comments?
Well, there's no love lost between Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister, and Liz Truss. I don't think the two have spoken since Liz Truss became Prime Minister. But I think what Nicola Sturgeon is really touching a nerve on is Liz Truss does not have a popular mandate. Boris Johnson, her predecessor, won a general election. Liz Truss has not won a general election as Conservative Party leader. She's been installed there by her own party. And there is therefore a question about her democratic legitimacy. I don't think there will be a general election. I think a new Prime Minister is at least possible, but this will be engineered once again within the Conservative Party. But the Conservative Party aren't going to bring forward a general election when the opinion polls show that they would be almost wiped out.
Right. Andrew, tell us a little bit about the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. He has served in government before. Why do you think Truss chose him for the clean-up job?
Well, while Kwasi Kwarteng is an ideologue, a right-winger, somebody with a profound commitment to lower taxes, Jeremy Hunt is a conservative but is much more moderate. He's a cautious person. He's also from the other wing of the Conservative Party to Liz Truss. So it does give the impression that she's reaching out to some of her critics within the party. But I think her hope is, that she's somebody that the markets will buy into as a pragmatic figure who will go for stability rather than ideology, in marked contrast to the outgoing Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, who was clearly an ideological Chancellor.
Right, let's touch upon the mood in Britain as of now. All this political upheaval, in fact, I'd go so far as saying weeks of political upheaval, is coming at a time when, as you pointed out, Britons are battling a crippling cost of living crisis. Do they have any faith left in the leadership?
It's not weeks, it's months of upheaval, because there was a long period of upheaval which led to Boris Johnson being ousted as Prime Minister, then the upheaval during the contest for the Conservative Party leadership, and now the profound upheaval of the past month in response to Liz Truss's initial economic moves and her cut in taxes. The opinion polls suggest that very few people, and that includes Conservative voters, have confidence in Liz Truss. I mean, clearly, if there is a period of stability and if the markets buy into the new Chancellor and a change in economic policy, things might improve for her. But really her big bet is that she will be able to get economic growth to an extent that people will feel better about the economy by the time of the next general election. That's difficult. It's 2 years away. It takes a long time for economic growth, first of all, to happen, and then to percolate through to people's, wage packets and their standard of living. And at the moment, her room for manoeuvre is deeply, deeply limited. And her own party is losing patience and losing confidence in their new leader.
Right, that's a powerful statement. Andrew, how will this fiasco impact the political fortunes of the Labour Party? What is the opposition doing to build momentum in their favour?
At the moment, they're just looking back, sitting back and pointing at the mess that the government is in. So there's a certain amount of schadenfreude, taking delight in the misfortunes of your opponents. But the Labour Party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has had a good few months. He has risen in his poll ranking. He's not an exciting political figure. He's not charismatic, but he is seen as sensible and a stable figure, and those are political attributes which seem to be in short supply at the moment. So Labour is now well ahead in the opinion polls, I mean with a commanding lead, 20, 25, 30 points ahead according to some opinion polls. And I think there's a growing public mood that Labour is likely to win the next election, having been out of power for as long as 12 years.
Right, just a final question there, Andrew, and very quickly, now we had Liz Truss say, when she was asked the controversial question, why should she stay on as Prime Minister, she said that she's determined to see through what she had promised. Do you see that happening?
No, because what she promised was major tax cuts, and she's already done a U-turn on that. So she's there because she's there. I think her agenda is almost dismantled. But whether the Conservative Party will feel that they can strike again and bring down yet another leader, having brought down Boris Johnson just a matter of a few months ago, that's far from certain.
Right, Andrew, thank you so much for all those insights, and thanks for joining us on Gravitas. Right, now from one controversial leader, let's move on to another one who's also making headlines, Vladimir Putin. I begin with a question. What is on Putin's mind? We had asked this question last night too. It is a question that the world has been asking for months. The events in the last 24 hours have made the question more relevant than it ever was. Because after bombing 10 Ukrainian cities, Moscow is saying it is open to talks. A statement from the Kremlin has caused quite a stir. Putin's spokesperson says Russia is ready to negotiate. Is that a serious offer? Or is it instead a smokescreen to escalate this conflict? What can Russia do next in Ukraine? This is our cover story. First, let's talk about that statement. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has given an interview. It was to a Russian newspaper. It was about the invasion of Ukraine. Let's tell you what he said. About the prospect for talks, I quote, "The direction has not changed. The special military operation continues. It continues in order for us to achieve our goals. However, we have repeatedly reiterated that we remain open to negotiations to achieve our objectives." Does that sound familiar to you? Vladimir Putin had said something on similar lines last month. Let me remind you, this was when he had annexed 4 Ukrainian territories. Listen in.
We call on the Kiev regime to cease firing and stop all military activities immediately, including the war it launched in 2014, and to come back to the negotiating table. We are ready to do this, as has been said on many occasions. But the choice of the people in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson areas is not up for discussion. It has been made.
Come back to the negotiating table. That was Putin's message. And now the Kremlin has made yet another appeal for talks. Well, the plan is a non-starter. Ukraine's position on this proposal is quite clear. They will not engage with Vladimir Putin under any circumstances.
He does not know what dignity and honesty are. Therefore, we are ready for a dialogue with Russia, but with another president of Russia.
So why then does Moscow keep bringing this up again and again? Earlier this week, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had said the same thing, that Russia is open for talks. Well, Washington, for one, isn't convinced about the proposals from Moscow. Listen in.
If the Russians want to signal that they're serious about dialogue and diplomacy, perhaps, and again, without being prescriptive, but perhaps a good first step would be to stop the kind of brutal assault followed by what appear to be nothing more than empty words.
Empty words. That's how America defines this. Putin responded to that statement today. He said there is no need to hold talks with the United States. The absence of a dialogue means only one thing: more escalation. A major face-off is now brewing between Russia and the West. Both Moscow and NATO are getting ready to hold nuclear drills. Reports say that Russia plans to conduct Grom drills. It will involve the Russian strategic nuclear forces. They will conduct large-scale maneuvers. This includes live missile launches. Meanwhile, NATO plans to hold similar nuclear drills of its own. They are happening next week. They are called Steadfast Noon. 14 NATO members will participate in these drills. They will involve fighter jets which are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. There won't be any live bombs, but NATO believes that these drills are a necessity for the military alliance as of now.
Russia's nuclear rhetoric is dangerous, reckless, and they know that if they use nuclear weapon against Ukraine, it will have severe consequences, and they also know that a nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought.
NATO and Russian drills are a yearly affair. But this year, with the war in Ukraine, these exercises assume fresh significance. They are keeping the spectre of a nuclear standoff alive in this war. And guess who thinks he can end this war? Erdogan, the president of Turkey. He, for one, has offered to mediate yet again. This is not the first time he has said this. But what makes him think he can help? Turkey's unique position in this war. That's what I'd like to focus on. Allow me to explain. For the last 8 months, Turkey has been one of the most active countries working to ensure a permanent ceasefire in this war. it has maintained friendly ties with both of its Black Sea neighbours. And this delicate balancing act has reaped a few benefits. For instance, in late September, Turkey orchestrated a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine. And Erdogan is said to have personally brokered the negotiations. 2 months before this, Erdogan also worked with the United Nations to broker a landmark grain deal between the two. This deal was to reopen certain Ukrainian ports and release exports that had been stuck there for months. Now, these back-to-back deals and settlements have instilled confidence in Erdogan himself that he can also end the war if he tries. In fact, he has gone ahead and even made a proposal. This is what the Kremlin's foreign policy advisor said recently. Listen to this carefully, I'm quoting. The Turks are offering their mediation. Erdogan will probably propose something officially. If any talks take place, then most likely they will be on their territory, Istanbul or Ankara. Now, two things stand out here. For one, Russia has acknowledged Erdogan's attempts. Two, it has also hinted at the possibility of talks, meaning that Moscow seems to be in favor of Turkey donning the mediator's hat. And by the way, Russia is not the only country which believes that Turkey can mediate. So does Hungary. The Hungarian foreign minister has even offered his support to Erdogan's attempts at brokering peace. Well, we sincerely hope their trust in the Turkish president is not misplaced. Because let's be frank, his track record at home is anything but peaceful. Look at the headline on your screen now. Turkey has passed a new disinformation law that could jail journalists for more than 3 years. This law will, in a sense, restrict any kind of criticism of the government of Erdogan. Also that of his government in the run-up to the elections. You see, Turkey is going to polls next year, and Erdogan's prospects don't look good. He's facing immense public scrutiny, and the opposition is gaining strength. In fact, for the first time in 17 years of Erdogan's rule, analysts say that the outcome of the polls is unpredictable. So what does Erdogan do? Well, he yet again dons the hat of a global leader. He tries to play mediator in the Ukraine war and passes draconian laws to censor free speech back at home. Now, this is what a central provision in Erdogan's new law states. Listen very carefully. People who disseminate false information about the internal and external security, public order and general well-being of the country in order to create anxiety, fear or panic among the public will face a prison sentence of between 1 and 3 years. Critics are calling this fascist. They say the vague and broad wording of this law will enable the government to put anyone behind bars. And that's scary. Leading the charge is the Turkish opposition, in fact. Look at these images. This is a Turkish opposition leader breaking his phone in parliament to denounce Erdogan's new bill. He literally took out a hammer and smashed it on his device. You have to watch this to believe it.
This law is of great interest to young people. I would like to address my brothers who are 15, 16, 17 years old and who will decide the fate of Turkey in 2023 and who will vote for the first time at the age of 18, 19, 20. You can't go on vacation wherever you want. You can't eat the food you want. You can't buy the tablet of clothes. You can't buy the tablet or clothes you want. You are unhappy. The reason for this is the AKP government and the MHP that follow it and the MHP that followed it. You have only one freedom. It is the phone in your pocket. There's Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. You communicate there. Today is October 12th. If the law here passes the parliament, you can break this phone like this. My young brothers, you will not need to use it. But let me warn you, in June 2023, these dear young people will give you the lesson you deserve.
You saw that. Now, this is the kind of pent-up anger that the Turkish people have towards Erdogan. Not just lawmakers, but also activists and journalists. On your screen now are shots of a few journalists staging a protest outside the Turkish parliament. They say that Erdogan's new law is tantamount to censorship, and that it will take their country further back in time. Take a look.
We, the journalists, are wanting both the lawmakers and the public once again as a part of our responsibility to society, and we call for a struggle together. If this law is implemented in its current form, the freedom of press, expression and communication in our country will be brought under great pressure and siege.
What does this tell you? That Erdogan may be acting like a global peacemaker, but at home, his policies are only disrupting the prevailing peace. His attempts at brokering peace between Russia and Ukraine fool no one, especially not when his own house is in complete disarray. Right, on to China now. The Communist Party Congress starts on Sunday, but Beijing is dealing with a big problem before the event. A rare protest against Xi Jinping himself. We had told you about these banners last night. Do you know what they said? They called Xi Jinping a dictator and asked Chinese citizens to get rid of him. Here's a quick recap. China quickly got rid of those banners. But guess what? The story hasn't died. This protest is still alive on the Chinese internet, and the Chinese government is struggling to put an end to it. Grabs of these banners went viral on Chinese social media. They sparked thousands of comments. We have managed to access some of them. These are from Weibo, China's alternative for Twitter. They are real comments. I'm reading some of them out loud. Oh, brave one, I salute you. Don't be silent, speak up. I hope the brave one stays safe. Brave one, we don't deserve you. And finally, you may strike fast, but you can't kill every brave person. Obviously, they are talking about that mystery demonstrator, the one who staged this dramatic protest. We still don't know who it was. Even Chinese netizens are curious. They have begun an online hunt. Online sleuths are trying to hunt this person down. Their focus is on a Chinese researcher, a physicist from the northern province of Heilongjiang. He is believed to be a person of interest. I'll tell you why. Apparently, these internet sleuths have managed to uncover a manifesto. It was taken down after the protest. But Chinese netizens have managed to retrieve it. What did it say? The document was 23 pages long. It called on Chinese citizens to launch a civil disobedience campaign. And one of the recommendations says that people should smash COVID testing stations. But why? The manifesto has one explanation. Allow me to quote from this report. This was to stop the dictator Xi Jinping from illegally continuing in office so that China can embark on the road to democracy and freedom. So it could be possible that this person was angry about China's zero COVID policy. We've seen public anger swell in the last few months. Some reports claim the local authorities did arrest one person in connection with this protest. However, we haven't been able to independently verify this. So the protest is being widely discussed. Online sleuths are conducting their own kind of investigations. The perfect nightmare if you are a Chinese censor. These censors are being forced to take extreme steps. Do you know what they did? They wiped the word Beijing completely. Yes, the word Beijing has been restricted in China. You know what that means? If someone tries searching for Beijing on the Chinese internet, they won't get any results. That's not all. Security of bridges in Beijing is being tightened. Just look at this. These are actual guards manning bridges in Beijing now. A news publication has put out a video on Twitter. Take a look. Let me remind you again, all that happened due to one protester. Just one demonstrator has exposed the biggest weakness of the Communist Party. It's paranoia, all about losing power. And now let's shift our focus to what's happening in the United States. A lot happened there in the last 24 hours. It recently wrapped up the final hearing in the January 2021 storming of Capitol Hill. A hearing aimed at implicating none other than Donald Trump for inciting his supporters into causing violence. In the next 3 minutes, I'll deconstruct the biggest takeaways from this hearing and try and understand what troubles, if any, Trump could likely face. Starting with this video now. This unseen footage of US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi trying her best to take charge of a complicated situation as Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. It was played out during the hearing on Thursday. It shows Pelosi dialing government officials, asking them to help clear up the complex. Watch this first, and then we'll discuss its relevance.
Hi, Governor. This is Nancy. Governor, I don't know if you have been approached about the Virginia National Guard. Mr. Hoyer was speaking to Governor Hogan, but I still think you probably need the okay of the federal government in order to come into another jurisdiction. Oh my gosh, they're just breaking windows. They're doing all kinds of. It's really that they said somebody was shot. It was just horrendous, and all at the instigation of the President of the United States.
In another segment from the footage, Pelosi can be seen talking to then Vice President Mike Pence, briefing him about the situation inside the Capitol, requesting him to send help immediately. Watch this now.
Gotten a very bad report about the condition of the House floor with defecation and all that kind of thing as well. I don't think that that's hard to clean up, but I do think it is more from a security standpoint of making sure that everybody is out of the building, and how long will that take?
As the video was being played, the hearing room fell silent. Why wouldn't it? This footage showed some of the most powerful individuals in America scrambling to drum up support. And that too from people and agencies that weren't prepared for this chaos. What followed next was even more consequential. The House committee investigating the matter held a vote. A vote to subpoena Donald Trump for his role in these riots. Let me explain what a subpoena means. It is essentially a writ ordering a person to come to court, a summon, a legal summon. The committee unanimously voted in its favor. Watch this now.
Ms. Cheney.
Aye.
Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Lofgren.
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren, aye. Mr. Schiff.
Aye.
Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Aguilar.
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mrs. Murphy.
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy, aye. Mr. Chairman, on this vote, there are 9 ayes and 0 noes.
What this basically means is that Trump will have to testify in court and answer for his actions. So when will that be? For now, a date has not been decided, but the subpoena will surely trigger a prolonged court battle. Because Trump has publicly refused to testify before the court. He says he will only do so if it's live. So what happens if he refuses? Well, no one knows. Reports say there is no Supreme Court precedent which says whether the US Congress has the power to make a former president testify about his actions in office. So it all depends on how Trump takes it. Now let's talk about another important aspect to this drama unfolding in America. The timing of this entire episode is even more fascinating. It comes weeks before the midterm elections, which Republicans are favored to win. They're leading almost every opinion poll. And should they win these elections and take control of the House, they've promised to disband the same January 6 committee itself. Why? Because they feel the committee is biased, that it's working in favor of the Democrats to overturn their electoral prospects in the polls. Some also say that the committee is serving as a distraction for Biden's own diminishing global popularity. Remember, Biden is slowly losing favor among his own allies. That brings me to Saudi Arabia. It's a story we have been tracking on the show. Saudi Arabia's rift with Washington is only growing, especially after Biden promised to make Riyadh pay consequences for refusing to ramp up oil production. The kingdom too has issued a strongly worded statement. Allow me to quote, "Any attempts to distort the facts about the kingdom's position regarding the crisis in Ukraine are unfortunate and will not change its principal position. We reject any dictates, actions or efforts to distort our objectives to protect the global economy from oil market volatility." Now, this may be just the most stinging rebuke of Washington by the Saudis. To the best of our memories, we don't recall the Saudis hitting back at the Americans like this, in such strong words. So when critics say that the January 6th committee is being used as a face-saving tactic by the Democrats, there seems to be some merit in what they're saying. Our next story is from the world of sport, and at the center of it is one of its biggest stars. There is a football World Cup coming up in just over a month, but one of sport's biggest stars finds himself battling not defenders on the pitch, but lawyers in a Spanish courtroom. We are talking about Neymar Jr., the talismanic striker for five-time world champions Brazil, who plays his club football in France with Paris Saint-Germain alongside Lionel Messi. Let me tell you what's happening. Neymar could face a minimum 2-year jail term if Spanish prosecutors have their way. This all dates back to his headline-grabbing transfer to Spanish giants Barcelona from Brazilian side Santos in 2013. Now, football transfers are usually cloak and dagger stuff, but the Neymar deal has also turned out to be murky. Let me tell you about the parties central to this case. Of course, there is Neymar himself and the two clubs. But Neymar's parents are also key players in this web of intrigue, with Brazilian investment firm DIS claiming to be the aggrieved party in this case. Remember, Neymar's talent was spotted at an early age, and he was spotted by Santos, who offered him a contract in 2003 when he was 11. Santos are one of Brazil's most famous and successful teams, and they're also the team that football legend Pelé played for between the years 1956 and 1974. Neymar signed his first professional contract with Santos at the age of 17. But his talent was no secret across football. Investment firm DIS attempted to cash in by purchasing a 40% stake in the player's future, the future transfer value, and they paid €2 million for those rights. Neymar finally moved to Barcelona in 2013 for a fee in the region of $57 million. Santos received a fee in the region of $17 million, while Neymar's parents received $40 million. DIS received a total of $6.8 million from Santos as their share. And a year later, it emerged that Barcelona had already struck a deal with Neymar's parents back in 2011. €10 million were paid as a down payment, and another $30 million when the transfer was eventually completed. Barcelona eventually got Santos to agree to a €17 million fee in 2013. The story blew up in early 2014, and then Barcelona president Sandro Rosell was forced to resign. A Spanish court accused Barcelona of financial engineering by inking 9 separate agreements to avoid paying tax. But the true cost of the deal was finally pegged at close to €86 million, with Santos receiving around $25 million, while the Neymar family received some $60 million. Now, DIS allege that they were cheated out of their legitimate share, with Barcelona and Santos agreeing to a private agreement that saw the Spanish side play a friendly with Santos that netted the Brazilians €4.5 million. A separate agreement was struck for a payment of $7.9 million for a right of first refusal on 3 players. Now, this was never exercised. DIS also claim that this deal was agreed upon to avoid a €65 million penalty clause in their original deal. Listen in.
Neymar's rights were not sold to the highest bidder. They were clubs that offered up to €60 million. The vision of our clients, what our clients and the prosecution accuse, is that the player received a bribe of €40 million tax-free. 10 of those 40 million were under a simulated loan contract and another 30 million under the formula of a future transfer of a player to Barcelona from the date that the player has the status of free agent. That is what the contract said.
DIS and the Professional Athletes Association of Brazil are demanding payback now. They have called for a 5-year prison term, a €149 million fine, and they also want the player to be disqualified as a player over the course of that sentence. Neymar's lawyers argue that both the player and his parents are Brazilian citizens and cannot be prosecuted by a Spanish court. Meanwhile, Barcelona settled the matter in court in late 2016 with Spanish prosecutors, but the DIS lawsuit rumbled on, and it's going to finally begin on Monday, with Neymar being ordered to be present in court. Now, Barcelona aren't out of the woods just yet. Former club president Rossell is facing a 5-year prison term for crimes of corruption and fraud related to this controversial transfer. Our next and final story tonight is about something which affects all of us. You, me, our families. Rising costs, soaring food prices. Things are getting more expensive, and there's no denying that. It's a story we've touched upon multiple times on this show. Inflation. Most of us are talking about it today. Our cost of living is rising. It's a marker which affects the overall quality of our life. But today, I want to talk about the impact of inflation on one particular generation, Gen Z. If you're watching me right now, you may know someone from this generation. In fact, you may be raising this generation or are part of this generation. Gen Z, basically anyone born after 1997 is part of this generation. They are also known as the Zoomers. So why am I today focusing on them? Because the next decade will be shaped by Gen Z. It is the largest generational cohort in history, I would say. And they too are deeply worried about the economy. So much so that they are struggling with financial anxiety. I am not saying this, a new survey is. A global survey finds that Zoomers want to inspire change. They are aware of global issues and geopolitical conflict. They are climate conscious. They seek not just money, but meaning in their jobs and tasks. Unfortunately, they are navigating an uncertain economy. And these Zoomers are deeply worried about the state of the world. This survey studied more than 14,000 Gen Zers across 46 countries. And what it found was a conflicted generation. On one hand, they want to drive change. And on the other, they are struggling with the cost of living crisis. Here now are some figures. A third of Gen Z respondents worry about the cost of living above all concerns. Around 45% live paycheck to paycheck. And just more than a quarter doubt that they'll retire comfortably. They're thinking long term. They worry that they won't be able to meet their expenses. I know what you're thinking. Don't we all have these concerns? An unstable economy impacts all of us. But it is particularly harsh on the youngest generation. Remember, they are still trying to figure out what they want to do. Many are yet to find their so-called calling in life. And don't forget, unlike the generations before them, Zoomers are experiencing such uncertainty perhaps for the first time. The pandemic was their watershed moment. They had to grow up. When they realized that things were not as rosy as they thought, the economy took a hit. Dream jobs fell through. Personal milestones were delayed. Epiphanies followed, both in personal and professional lives. And then began the era of the Great Resignation, followed, of course, by quiet quitting. But the pandemic forced Zoomers to rethink their financial priorities. It pushed retirement planning to the top of the list. But the financial uncertainty made it harder to save for a rainy day. Another major hurdle is debt. Remember, Gen Zers are entering adulthood. They would be heading into the workforce from university. They're struggling to pay off their student debt or establish a solid credit history. For instance, in the US, the average Gen Zer owes roughly $20,900 in student loan debt. In the UK, student debt figures exceed $45,000 for undergraduate borrowers. Now, I'm not saying these things are harder for younger people, but there is a reason why plenty of research is being poured in to study this specific generation. Because it is our future. If they decide to exit the workforce, it will affect us. If they struggle to find jobs, it will affect growth across quarters. If they can't repay loans, well, I don't need to tell you why that's bad news for everyone. Gen Z has inherited an uncertain economic climate. Many experts say this generation is accustomed to spending beyond their means, and they may not be saving enough for the future, not because they don't want to, but because of rising expenses. Once again, inflation. And all this eventually has an impact on their mental well-being, and that is a bigger concern. Another survey suggests that 83% of Gen Zers are battling milestone anxiety, essentially the pressure to hit social milestones, be it getting married, having children, or even buying a house. All this chips away at their self-confidence. So yes, this uncertain economic climate affects all of us. Even as we gear up for the holiday season, we are reading about looming recession fears. All I'll say is, if you see a younger member of your family, a co-worker perhaps, or a friend struggling, do give them a patient hearing. And on that note, it's time now to switch to Gravitas Global Headlines. Take a look.
North Korea fires a short-range ballistic missile into the sea off its east coast. Flies fighter jets near the heavily fortified border with the south as Seoul scrambles its jets to counter Pyongyang. Hungary publishes a national consultation survey asking citizens to agree or disagree with the government's opposition to European Union sanctions against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. European foreign ministers discussed the transfer of Iranian drones to Russia after Ukraine reported a spate of Russian attacks using Iranian-made Shahed 136 drones. Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinian gunmen during an operation in the city of Jenin. Israel says troops came under heavy fire during the operation, during which an armed operative of the militant group Hamas and 2 others were arrested. India's INS Arihant carries out a successful launch of a submarine-launched ballistic missile. The missile was tested to a predetermined range and impacted the target area in the Bay of Bengal. Thousands across Australia's southeast asked to evacuate their homes, including some in a suburb of Melbourne, after 2 days of incessant rains trigger flash floods. Environmental protesters throw tomato soup over Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers painting at London's National Gallery in the latest direct action stunt targeting works of art. The UK's Royal Mail postal operator has said that it is seeking to axe up to 10,000 jobs by the end of August 2023. Mohammad Shami has been officially named as the replacement for the injured Jasprit Bumrah in India's T20 World Cup squad. The pacer has reached Australia and will link up with the team ahead of the warm-up matches. Shardul Thakur and Mohammad Siraj have been added as standby players. A fact-finding team investigating the Indonesian football tragedy has said that tear gas fired indiscriminately by police personnel was the main cause of the stampede. More than 130 people were killed in what was one of the deadliest disasters in football history.
And that's a wrap on the show. Thanks for watching Gravitas with me, Priyanka Sharma. We leave you as always with Gravitas images.